This is SoundNotion, the weekly podcast for new music and music news. I'm Patrick Gulo.
I'm Sam Merciers.
I'm Dave McDonald.
And this week we are joined by Jeffrey Leffer and Jonathan Nickel, two members of the H2 Quartet. I was lucky enough to see them perform twice in New York City recently. And they just came out with a new album called Revolution. So we'll be listening to a track from that later. Guys, welcome to the show.
Hey, nice to be here. Thanks for having us.
Yeah.
What's the disc called?
It's actually called Groove Machine.
The Groove Machine, sorry.
But Groove Machine is a movement from a Mark Mellett's quartet called Revolution.
Right.
I think we need to start collecting a Gulo gaff reel.
I'm just looking at it on the document right here. I'm like, okay, Revolution.
Revolution was one of the ideas for title, I guess.
Well, thank you guys so much for joining us. It's great to have you on. We've been
Well,
meaning
thanks
to
for
have
having
you
me.
guys on for a long time. We know these guys from graduate school, but they also happen to be awesome musicians. So, one of you, Jeff or Jonathan, you want to tell us a little bit about H2 Quartet? Actually, your compatriot Jeff Dybel recently made sure that everybody understood that it was the H2 Quartet and not the H2 Saxophone Quartet.
Wow.
So,
So be aware.
I'm going to be very careful not to say H2 Saxophone Quartet today. Tell us a little bit about H2, Jeff.
Well, we were a student group, and we formed in 2002. At the time, we were students at Northwestern University. And in 2006, we reformed at Michigan State University while we were pursuing our doctoral degrees. And we added Jonathan Nickel, and he was a great addition. At first, we did a lot of competitions and the sort of things that you expect from students. And subsequently, we've branched out into our professional careers and have really been doing a lot of great things, I think, championing saxophone and a lot of new music. And we're really excited about some of the things we've done together over the past few years.
And you guys are pretty spread out now, right? You all live in I think each of you lives in a different state right now, right?
Well, I currently live in Oklahoma, and Jonathan remains in Michigan and Grand Rapids. Kim lives in Tallahassee, Florida, while Jeff Dybel lives in Gainesville, Florida.
Okay.
So, we are pretty spread out, and that's not. It's relatively common, I would say, for a lot of professional saxophone groups, just because the job demands it, and so it does present certain challenges. Rehearsing is a little bit of a challenge, but we do have a foundation. We played together so long while we were living in Michigan, going to school together, that really helps. And right now, we're actually all in Michigan. Primarily for the purposes of rehearsal to learn all the new music we're going to be playing over the next year.
Excellent. So we haven't. I don't know if we had any saxophone music on the show before. I can't remember.
I don't think so.
So it's Saxophone Quartet is a medium with which much of our audience may not be familiar. Can you guys describe a little bit Saxophone Quartet and its place in new music in particular? We don't hear any Haydn string quartets being played by a lot of saxophone quartets.
Yeah, why?
Where's all the Haydn?
Yeah.
Well, that is a good question. The saxophone, it's a new instrument, and we look at the bulk of our repertoire being in the 20th and now the 21st century. Though we do have some works in the 19th century, composers during that time were relatively unsure about what the saxophone was capable of, what it sounded like. And so you find a lot of music that, though originally composed for saxophone, emulates that of the string quartet. We even have a work that we recorded by Alexander Glazunov, the famous Russian romantic composer. And even that work, though composed for saxophone quartet, is reminiscent of his string quartet writing. So the saxophone has a place in music, but primarily we find it has a place in new music. And that's kind of an element that we work towards. I think it's exciting in a way for composers because Haydn never wrote for our instrument. It was not around when he was composing. I think composers who write for string quartets, they often have to consider what Haydn did for the string quartet, what Beethoven did for the string quartet, Bartók, Shostakovich. When a composer writes for the saxophone, those aren't really considerations at that point, not specifically for our instruments. And in that way, I think it makes it exciting that as performers, we have an opportunity to help in a large way push the direction of the instrument. And I would say composers have that same opportunity. The saxophone is still fresh, it's still new, and we just don't have much of a background. And so we try to play an eclectic mix of music, but primarily we play works in the 20th and 21st century, music of our generation.
But the Saxophone Quartet is extremely versatile, which is, I think, one of the reasons it's becoming more popular in contemporary music. We can play an extreme range, successfully perform contemporary and extended techniques, and the timbre provides room for a lot of color, and many composers are really enjoying that medium because of the flexibility it allows them.
Well, I noticed on this lovely disc here, the oldest piece on here is 93. Everything else is 2004 or later. So that's clearly, even for saxophone rep, that's relatively recent, right?
Absolutely. And I think something that we're doing really well with H2 is looking forward and trying to extend trends that we see in contemporary music, but at the same time finding music that is enjoyable to a broader audience. Because, I think every music or every genre, every style has an audience. It's just how big is that audience? And if we're wanting to expand it, we have to consider the music that we're playing. And for Groove Machine, we kind of jumped on the minimalist or post-minimalist trend, if you want to call it that we're seeing is quite popular in New York right now. And that's why we chose the Mark Mellot's Quartet as the focal piece for the album.
So why don't you tell us about the rep on the album then, since we're steering toward that? You mentioned Mark Mellot's. A lot of these guys are relatively young, including Mellot's. What drew you to these composers that are on this disc?
Well, just their personal aesthetic as composers. And for this album, we wanted to explore grooves function in contemporary music in different ways. For instance, we have a contemporary tango, Tango Virtuoso by Thierry Escache. And, it's really a virtuosic piece for the soprano player. But, it also is a dance piece and it has groove in that way. Engrenage, another work on the album, features pianist Sergei Kvitko. It translates to engrenage translates to gears, so you have this really driving rhythmic music, and so we're trying just to balance the aesthetic. Murray Gross's piece, "The Wild Wild West," moves from expansive open fifths to some dance-like rhythmic sections, so we find groove in that. And, the Mark Mellot's piece is, we always, when we're introducing it, say it's very much like rock and roll, where it has some tunefulness, but at the same time, the organization is terrific, and, it's just driving music.
Cool.
So would you say this is a dance music album?
No, I wouldn't say it's a dance music album. We were at a contemporary music festival, or not a contemporary music festival, sorry, a chamber music festival, and a string quartet said there's only two kinds of music, that's song and dance, which I know is arguable, of course. But
that's a popular notion, especially pianist Kirill Ger sort of lumps music into those two categories too. Mm-hmm. Do you feel? I mean, how is that debatable?
Well, I think you can look at some spatial music, maybe like some Feldman, where music existing over time isn't necessarily about song or about dance. It's about timbre and texture, or it's that affect that the music is trying to create. So I suppose a lot of it has to do with the intent of the response that you're looking for the audience, and how the music fits into their boxes as listeners, I suppose.
Right.
Yeah.
I think you could make the argument that song and dance, using that as a delineation, is sort of tipping your hat to music that is a little more on the accessible side, because a song or a dance is what the people are looking for,
Correct.
And contemporary music embracing the idea of, pulse-based music, let's say, I think goes a long way towards giving people something that they can really latch onto. And the Saxophone Quartet, like the String Quartet, I think does it equally well. Like, you guys are able to do pulsing and driving, but do it with a lot of subtlety that would be analogous to the way Bartok handled string quartets, So I think we're going to see a lot of great Saxophone Quartet works over the next couple of years.
We hope so.
A lot of the performers that we've had on recently and the ensembles that we've talked about a lot lately are collectives that include composers and performers, or composers/performers. You guys are mostly strictly performers, and I'm curious about how you guys go about finding new works for your ensemble, because a lot of these, I would imagine, are not works that you can just phone up a publisher and send away for in the mail and wait 4 to 6
but
weeks.
Perhaps phone up a composer.
Sure. But I'm wondering how you find the music that you perform and that you record. Either of you, Jeff, why don't you take this one?
Well, that's actually one of the things that we're really excited about, is that we have an opportunity to champion our own music. And most of the last 2 discs, Times and Spaces being the one prior to Groove Machine, most of that music is actually composed for our ensemble. And that's really fascinating for us, because it gives us an opportunity to take part in a collaborative process, to take an active role in the direction of not only what our ensemble does, but what other saxophone ensembles can do. And we notice that a lot of the works that we commission, other groups play those works. And I think that other composers have some influence on what's going on as a result of those works. So we find that fascinating. We do keep up with some of our professional counterparts, and it allows us an opportunity to do consortium projects, so that we can have pieces that are composed for multiple groups at the same time. We find that fascinating. We also see what some of our contemporaries are doing, and emulate those practices, if it's the same piece sometimes, but often there's a style or a certain aesthetic that they're going after that we really enjoy. I think one of the things as an ensemble we really try to focus on is just having a large spectrum of what we can do and what we can present. We just want to be versatile. The saxophone's a versatile instrument, and stylistically we can certainly be versatile, and that's what we're looking for in the music. And so in the last 2 CDs, we found most of the music's written for us, but it's very different. And they're 2 different types of discs. And we really enjoy that. I don't know if Jonathan has anything to add to that part.
Yeah, I think something that we do really well is we research composers, research new music, research what our peers are doing. And Revolution, which is on our Groove Machine disc by Mark Mellitz, came to fruition just through a cold call to Mark. And I had heard a string quartet of his second string quartet, on a Steve Reich album, or it was a string quartet album that featured a Steve Reich piece and his quartet. And I said, wow, that would work really well for Saxophone Quartet. So I emailed him and told him about my idea, and he thought it was a great idea to do the arrangement for Saxophone Quartet. And, it's really built a terrific relationship with the composer as well, which is something I think H2 really values as well, is forming these relationships with composers. Because, once you meet a composer and work with that composer and understand that person's music, then it leads you to another composer, it leads you to another person, and we just keep on expanding our network, which is really important to do, you know. And then it's a way for us to take ownership of our art.
Yeah, and I think each of you individually, knowing you all for personally, have your own favorite kinds of music, and a lot of times I can almost tell who brought in what piece to the group, and I think that adds to that diversity that you were talking about. You know, these are all pieces that are often written with your group in mind, but at the same time, there's a lot of really different sounds across not just this one album, but all three of this is your third album, right?
Correct.
So all three of the albums of yours that I've heard. So I think it's a really interesting thing that you all can share that responsibility and have this really diverse group of sounds.
So one of the things that you guys have done, I know, because I've been around for some of it, is embrace technology as an ensemble. I know you've done pieces where you just play along with stuff, and Jeff, with a G, just finished a project with Nate in Florida involving electronics. This week on the show, there's an article about Apple music and classical music. But it focuses mainly on the iPad as sort of a tool. So as a way to get into this article, I wonder if you guys have anything to say about the foibles or benefits of working with technology in performance.
Well, you know, the benefit with working with technologies obviously gives us a much bigger palette from which to work. And, you know, composers find that part as well. We've played a lot of music as soloists that use electronics in some capacity, some with computer, with a USB foot switch. The most simplest, of course, I think just being CD playback. Even as a quartet, we performed works that have this electronic component, and it's usually with a computer with a program that has certain triggers, and so the electronics become an integral part of the production. You know, and that's kind of the beauty of it, is it gives us a much bigger palette. There's different sounds. It's just different possibilities. Of course, we find it very difficult to travel with sometimes with electronics. And I remember we were premiering a work by Ben Furman in Bangkok, Thailand in 2009. It was really quite a challenge to make this work, because we get over there and the power conversion doesn't work for the computer, and we had to do multiple sound checks, and it's almost where it could be a disaster, and we were able to get it to work. But that's always kind of the things. It's a little bit scary, actually, from a performance standpoint. Is how unpredictable it can be. But we do enjoy the opportunity. And, you know, certainly I think it's worth embracing this trend rather than trying to stay away from it. It opens more possibilities for the ensemble and for us as composers, and, of course, for our audiences.
Now, speaking of this Apple article, I want to kind of bring this point up. They talk about this a little bit. With Apple being such an easy interface, or the iPad in general, all of their products, do you feel that in any way will hinder composition or performance in the future, in that it won't be able to handle some more complex things that you would like to do?
Well, I'd like to see the iPad used for notation, and I don't think that's being maximized at all right now. I think there's a few apps for reading music, but with the digital display, I could allow composers, you know, to incorporate more colors or different designs in the notation, and then also it saves us having to be constricted with page turns. And, you know, it would be so cool if there was a way to have the iPad read our sounds or listen to our sounds and move pages while we were playing and change that. So that's one of my hopes for iPad software is just to help us with notation and reading sheet music.
I feel like that's not the most practical thing though, because the iPad is so small compared to a sheet of paper. I mean, in music, we don't even use normal size sheets of paper. So for something to work on an iPad, I feel like it would have to be engraved specifically for that size, and there would have to be a lot of page turns. And when the music gets more complicated, when there are more notes that have to be in a measure, you're going to have a lot of one-bar systems, and that doesn't look very good. That is one thing that I would really shy away from is because and also that's just another set of scores and or parts that I as a composer would have to make. That's not something that I am ready to jump into until there are screens that are much larger than
or
iPad.
spreadable.
That's fascinating. You know, I know of a wedding band in Chicago that uses iPads, you know, totally. And, you know, so the person that's calling the tunes can call up the next chart, and then it's pulled up, and then it's played, and it really works well for that situation. You know, also for us as performers, just thinking about going out on tour, you know, we could take our whole library of repertoire with us all the time if it was on that. But you're absolutely right. And Dave, your scores are the most beautiful I think I've ever seen.
Thank you.
I mean, absolutely. And you put so much craft into the design of the notation on the page. But if the screen was bigger, I mean, it could provide, you know, an easier way for us to be out on tour with all of our music.
Yeah, no, I think it would be a great thing. One of the things that they're talking about in here is the score thing, but a lot of what they're talking about in this article is actually making the sounds with iPads, and it's a really cool thing. Most of the performances that I've seen that use something like this are not using the iPad as the way of making sound, but just as a way to control a more powerful program like Ableton Live or something on a big computer that's actually doing the heavy lifting and you know, synthesizing the audio or whatever. And I think that's a really cool way to use it, because then you can continue to you know, upgrade the thing that the iPad, upgrading the iPad is pretty easy. You just need another thing that will send those same messages to the computer, and it doesn't always have to be locked in. That's kind of one of the problems with especially earlier technology in composition and in performance is that you have to dig up these old devices that don't exist anymore. And as we move to more open platforms and more software based rather than hardware based projects, I feel like that really helps these pieces have a longer life. Even if you just look back a few years ago, I think it was a John Adams opera that I was looking at recently. Anyway, it was
with a zip drive.
Yeah, you had to have like a zip drive.
That's of Klinghoffer.
Yeah, that's exactly what it was. It was Klinghoffer. And you had to have a zip drive, and you had to have these very specific old synthesizers and controllers and everything. And digging up these things from even 10 years ago would be really, really difficult. But I think it would be much easier to find a way to make that software work.
An issue I had with the article is how it focuses like on the iPad as if that is the technology in question in total. You know what I mean?
Well, is it for the most part?
No, like Dave said, it's understanding understanding technology in this case for me would be beneficial to understand what technology can do for you, not what an iPad can do for you. You know what I mean?
I'm like referring to bringing device on stage for an interactive, notational, editable experience, or something along those lines. I mean, I just see the iPad so much more.
Sure, but you know that doesn't mean. I think you should understand it as a controller, not as an iPad. Like, don't think the iPad is responsible for that. Think technology is responsible for that.
Yeah, I understand.
One of the other interesting things in here is talking about people who express concern over using this kind of technology for younger composers, how it'll make them soft or something, and how they won't understand how things, quote, actually work. This is, somebody says, student composers don't have an understanding of how things actually will sound or work. They trust the computer too much to figure it out for them. All of that stuff to me is a bankrupt argument.
Yeah, well, they said the same thing when MIDI came.
Yeah, I mean, that is ridiculous. That kind of an argument is ridiculous. Like they're saying, like he sees student works that show up where they're set all the default settings of Sibelius, including, the time signature and the tempo. And I'm like, I'm sure you see that a lot. But if don't have the wherewithal to customize your notation software to suit what you're hearing in your head, then you're not really a composer yet anyway. And as a teacher, it's your job to point that out. It's not like you've created such a horrible habit that it's unbreakable. So arguing that is just silly.
That same statement led me to, I thought about GarageBand, and how GarageBand will just set up loops and do a lot of that process for the student. But at the same time, maybe that's a great gateway for the student into more complex programming and software too.
Yeah, placing value judgments on whether something is created with loop-based software or any other way. Not that they shouldn't be there at all, depending on the situation, but making that like your first critique to me is going nowhere fast.
And it's not as though this is the only way that the music is created. Like you could have a piece that incorporates iPad and computer stuff that isn't exclusively created by iPad and computer stuff. I'm helping out with a project right now that's got electronics and chamber orchestra.
Does Apple allow that?
Say what?
Does Apple allow that?
Allow what? Me to be involved in any project that uses their product?
Yes.
I'm not writing it or anything. I'm just mixing some audio when Nate's not around.
This show's gonna go up on the web later. You better be careful. They'll find you.
No, but so this piece has 2 electronic musicians and chamber orchestra, and a lot of the electronic stuff is iPad stuff. And the orchestra conductor in rehearsal is like, I need some more iPad 2 there in measure 35. Yeah. And it's a very weird thing, but it can be just another instrument that's just another thing making noise in the score,
Right.
I think we should probably hit the next one, and perhaps I could have come up with a better transition than just saying let's go to the next one, because
it played so well into it.
I know, it was so well designed.
You screwed it up.
You want to fix it? I wasn't looking at the list when I did that.
It's
anyway,
too late, Dave.
It's too late.
Speaking of
technology and classical music.
Now we've actually talked about this before. We've talked about
the new World Symphony before.
Yeah.
And they have their lovely new Frank Gehry building, and they're working on bringing in the Utes. They need to bring in the Utes to the classical
getting those
music.
kids. Get them while they're young.
So they've got a new project that kind of is a mashup of orchestra culture and I guess club culture. You want to talk about this one a little bit, Patrick?
Yeah. So this article that appeared in the Wall Street Journal by Arian Campo Flores,
which is where you go for arts criticism.
Right. Reporting from Miami Beach, which is where you go for the club scene, apparently, too. Basically goes over the idea of mixing these two genres together and points out some very noted figures, people that you'd recognize, like Mason Bates, were kind of blending the two genres together, and in an effort to bring people from all different walks of life and people who might have a taste for club music but not concert music, who possibly could be persuaded to start attending more classical performances.
Yeah, I'd like to see how it actually plays out in performance, like what it's like actually being there.
Yeah, I mean, if you've seen the pictures, I mean, we'll link to this this article, but I mean, I don't know, they look pretty cool.
I mean, they've got great lighting and everything, but that doesn't say anything about the dynamic of what the performance was like. I mean, is it everybody listening all the time and being engaged, or is it people bobbing and weaving to club music and then going to the bathroom during the symphony? During the Mozart symphony.
Well, I think they're encouraged to like walk around, aren't they? It's not like I mean, there's not. You don't go in and sit down in your seat and just sit there for the whole performance. It's an open, more club-like atmosphere.
Right.
You can walk around the whole time. I don't think anybody's paying any more or less attention to the Mozart than they are to DJ Masonic, Mason Bates.
So you can walk up to the bar during.
Sure. I mean,
anyway,
Mozart
there's something to be said for
drives me
that.
to drink.
Hey, don't you guys find it odd that they use Mozart and Stravinsky and Gabrielli as the symphony music with the club music?
Yeah, I don't know why they would just keep it all to like Mason Bates style stuff, because that seems to be more along the lines of like facilitating that kind of experience.
It's like the culture saying, we got to slam them with Mozart. If we're going to get them to appreciate concert music, you got to start with some Mozart. Otherwise, we're not doing our job. Haven't they heard enough Mozart, and everything from Bugs Bunny to, I don't know, commercials on television?
Right.
Yeah.
We get that constantly.
I think it's a real tragedy. And I do think it's a great idea to try to branch out and maximize our audiences. And this is maybe a way to do it, but I'm not sure it's the most prudent way. And that's a real problem. In the 20th and now 21st century becomes more and more, increasingly more about commercialism in music, and it's less about art and it's more about making money. And there's certainly classical. Well, and there's a need for that. And look, I mean, I love Mozart as much as anybody. I mean, I teach music theory and I have that background, sure, but I'm not sure that this is the best place for it. And in a way, I feel like we exploit Mozart because we're trying to gain a new audience, and here's a new perspective on what would be considered art music on some level. And I think it's certainly a great idea. But then why draw back into the classical period? And it's something that doesn't really make sense. And I think it's purely for commercial motivations, that you're under the assumptions that, well, these young people who don't have a lot of experience with Mozart, they'll hear it in this context, so then they'll buy subscriptions to the symphony. And I think it's false logic. I'm not really sure that's what's the driving factor here. The motivation is it's a novelty. It's kind of cool, and you have the lighting, and you can drink, and you can walk around during the pieces. But that doesn't really suit the music that's going on. It's no longer about art. It's not art, and it's not the same piece. Mozart was written in different contexts. So I think the motivation here on one level is very nice, but I'm not sure that it works.
Are all the pieces? Well, all the pieces, from what my understanding, are remixed, right? So there is.
No, I think the regular pieces are performed normally.
Yeah, like they do a Mozart movement, and then they do a piece that's like based on a Mozart movement.
I thought they'd manipulate. I thought they'd have like some
I think
DJ.
they're alternating between remixes and the actual performance. But I think the reason they have Mozart is because the name Mozart has such cultural capital. That it makes people go, ooh, Mozart and DJs.
I don't know
and you
about
wouldn't
the people
do that
attending.
if it was Mason Bates and DJs.
I think I'd take a different tack on this. I mean, that's not the audience you're hoping to get.
No. People wouldn't. It's because people recognize Mozart as this, quintessentially classical thing, and it's not an interesting mashup to mash up crazy electronic remix stuff with somebody you've never heard of.
I don't know.
It's an interesting mashup to make crazy electronic DJ stuff with something that you see of as the public sees as the opposite of that thing.
Yeah, they're using the Mozart name just for the slug line almost.
Yes.
They're not gonna say Mason Bates remixing Roger Sessions.
Yeah, well, they wouldn't say that.
No,
I mean,
I would buy that.
If someone
that sounds interesting to me.
If someone's already going to come to this kind of concert, I don't think you'd need to also say that there's going to be Mozart in the program. I mean, like, you've got them already, and they're going to come to this thing.
I disagree. I think they're relying on the Mozart brand.
Yeah, I agree.
I think Jeff with J is correct.
I wonder how many people like you typically see subscriber people to an orchestra would come to something like this, or if this is a really not a blended crowd, but a whole different crowd.
Maybe there's people bringing their kids or grandkids.
Right. Though it seems like, according to this article, that's not the case. But I think it's also important to point out that this is the new World Symphony. This is not a regular orchestra. There's no way this thing would go on at a regular orchestra. There's no orchestra of journeyman classical musicians that would do this kind of thing. This is only going to happen with people in their 20s.
Yep. And speaking of orchestras, good news in Philadelphia this week, right, Dave?
That's right.
Tell us about it.
That's right.
That's right, Sam. The Philadelphia Orchestra, who last year, I guess, went into Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection, announced a few weeks ago that they had settled with the Musicians' Pension Fund, though they kind of screwed the Musicians' Pension Fund, and the Musicians' Pension Fund just kind of put a nice face on it. But they have announced that in this last week, in part because of that settlement, they will hopefully this summer be coming out of Chapter 11.
Heyo.
So, congratulations to the Philadelphia Orchestra.
As always, anyone interested in knowing more about that or anything related to the orchestra business, go on over to adaptistration.com, where friend of the show, Drew McManus, publishes a blog. Very informative blog.
Drew knows everything when it comes to classical music business.
I hope Drew puts that as a quote on his website.
Yes,
Drew knows everything.
Not one of the biggest stories this week, but one of the more charming to me is Alarm Will Sound is crowdsourcing lyrics to a Cage. What is it? The Cage.
They're kind of non-specific, but it seems like it's the Cage songbooks that they're talking about. They have a blog post all about it. You can follow their new Twitter feed. They have a new Twitter stream specifically for this project. They're looking for contributions to I think the Twitter feed is at Cage Songbook or something like that.
At Cage Songbooks.
Yeah, at Cage Songbooks. So you can follow them, and they will tweet out instructions or requests when the time comes. There are currently only 29 followers. There are only 29 followers to this account right now. So you can get in on the ground level and be a part of this cool project, crowdsourcing content for Cage Songbooks.
I don't think that hashtag is correct. It's Cage AWS or something like that.
No. They have a Twitter feed that you follow.
Oh, gotcha.
It's at Cage Songbooks.
Well, yeah, and there you can go and find the formula for submitting your text. There is a formula you have to follow.
And then, this is one Patrick really wanted to talk about, right?
I just wanted to say
the biggest story of the week in classical music is
Joshua Bell on Dancing with the Stars.
He's so dreamy.
What I wanted to say was, I don't know if anybody caught Lincoln Center's quote or Twitter quote, or not quote, but what they said when they linked to this article. And it was, we're not sure how we feel about this, but here you go.
awesome.
It's like the best thing I've ever seen Lincoln Center tweet.
Yeah.
Okay, so it was a terrible experience. You can watch this video. It's an awful idea.
But it's like watching a car. You just can't stop.
Classical
you cannot
night.
Stop. So Joshua Bell is playing Vivaldi, and then the Dancing with the Stars people come out in these ridiculous wigs and buckled shoes. And
I guess you could finger quote period costumes.
Yes, finger quote period costumes. It was really atrocious. And then at the end, the host guy, whose name I can't remember right now, yes, says something like, and that was a song from Joshua Bell's last album, The Four Seasons by Vivaldi. And I give up.
The horrible metadata in classical music presents itself even when he's announcing the piece.
Right. Sam?
Also this week, Adam, I guess it's Yawk. I don't know how you pronounce his name. MCA from the Beastie Boys passed away at 47 from cancer. And, Beastie Boys are way more important to the new music world than Joshua Bell playing on Dancing with the Stars. That's for sure. They really did a lot to bring hip hop and rap to the mainstream, and got it onto MTV. And they are a bunch of white former punk band guys. And the interesting thing to me is that when they did it, they weren't asking anybody's permission or even anybody's opinion. They did it, and they did it really well. And they said, "Here it is, take it or leave it." So,
you'll be missed.
You will be missed. Also this week, Rob Deemer, friend of the show, Rob Deemer, who we talk about a lot, has an article about that's referencing some articles recently on New Music Box about teaching, specifically teaching composition at the collegiate level and the role that composers might have in that environment. And this is kind of stuff we've talked about a great deal, but I bet the guys in the H2 guys are going to have some stuff to say about this because of all the collaborative work they've done with composers. To me, Rob's big point is one way we could really benefit is getting composers involved in the music education programs at universities, which I think we would all be unanimous in saying there's little, if any, communication between the composition studio and the music education department, at least in my experience at 3 different schools. And we could benefit and increase the number of people who have a compositional bent if we get them started earlier rather than later. Interestingly, Rob points out that it's a national standard for education, that composing and arranging within specified guidelines is national standard number 4 for music educators. And they don't seem to be standing up to that, at least in my experience.
National standards? What?
What are those?
What?
I mean, I was not aware that composition was a part of the national standards. And when he's talking about national standards, these are national standards for accreditation, right?
Right.
And they're for university accreditation, or are these national standards for secondary schools?
Secondary schools.
Yeah,
that's what I thought. This is high schools.
Yeah.
There's 9 of them.
I think the argument is, by extension, you want band directors to be able to teach composition because it is a secondary educational requirement. So people becoming band directors need to work with composers to learn some of these skills so that they can pass them on, which is the kind of thing we've addressed many, many times on the show, but I think we can never address it too many times, I guess.
Did you have any composition teaching before you got to college?
None.
I mean, I
know it's hard to believe.
Yeah, I think even before high school music educators are teaching composition, they have to address theory. And that's one of the biggest holes in high school music education is students coming in without any theory background. No. Maybe it's something that could be simultaneous.
That's what I'm thinking.
Well, I agree with this point, and it is it's unfortunate that there's not more emphasis on composition. This is such an integral part of the creative process, and I would say, in many ways, some of the most gratifying experiences that you can have with music, and it is blatantly absent from our secondary schools. And I think about a lot of programs I've been in contact with, even my own programs. I had a great instrumental experience, a great pedagogical foundation. But in terms of composing, I mean, that was something unheard of. And I'd say the same from the academic components of music, too, of music theory, even music history. I mean, knowing just a little bit about a little bit, I really didn't coming out. And it's too bad because I came from such a strong program with great teachers. It just wasn't a part of the program, basically. And that's really common in secondary schools. And I would say, though I think it'd be important as a component in a music education degree, it's not set up that way. When someone goes through school to be a band director, to be an orchestra director, to teach public schools, you really get kind of the minimum amount of theory. I mean, it's basically you're going to get the smallest amount that you can get in order just to have an idea of what's going on. It'd be the same with music history, and composition, unfortunately, is absent from that. And I'm not sure that it should be. I think it would be prudent to take an approach where we're going to value creativity, and you can learn this stuff. And I would just say from my own experiences, and of course I am primarily a performer, but I compose as well. And it's always very revealing to me when I compose the music that comes out, because it's not at all like I would expect. And so, it does hone in part of the creative process. That is true. But it also gives me kind of an idea of what my musical foundation really is, and it's much different than I expected. So I'd say it's definitely important, and it is too bad that there's not more emphasis in the schools all the way through, from secondary school through a college education for our music educators and our future music educators.
Right.
Did you guys ever talk about sound painting?
On the show? I don't know.
Yeah.
Maybe.
But I think sound painting would be a fascinating approach to this, because it incorporates the third standard, which is teaching improvisation and composition, simultaneously.
Yeah.
For
those that don't know, you want to explain what sound painting is?
Sure. Sound painting is I guess a device, you could say, that Walter Thompson created to allow performers to improvise organized patterns through hand gestures, I guess is one way of putting it. And so, there's thousands of gestures, and each one has a meaning, and a performer sees that gesture and responds to it with the instrument or with the voice or, with movement. But what it allows is for young students to learn these gestures and improvise, without having a theoretical background, without understanding a jazz background, and experiment with different sounds, timbres, and textures, which is really cool. And it's very hit or miss. Sometimes a composition is really cool, and other times it just kind of bombs. But it's a wonderful way to approach improvisation.
Yeah, and you're right that it includes both, because it's also a way for students to compose things without knowing quite as much, and they can just think about the larger structures.
Mm-hmm.
And they can think about textures and big chunks of form without having to understand the nitty-gritty of putting notes together, because that's very difficult. It took me a lot of time to figure out how to do that in any reasonable kind of way to make a piece of music, and this would be a way to incorporate that now before students get to those smaller scale things. And
just in the interest of creating a rich aesthetic environment, if you've got undergraduates showing up at your school for whom the idea of collaborative improvisation in a group like that is not something crazy and weird that now that I'm in college I might try, it's like something that's just normal. It's a part of being a, going through a music education program. If they showed up with that kind of attitude, I think that would go a long way towards pushing the university forward some.
Yeah, and I also think by getting this to everybody, it helps with, and this is something I talk about all the time, with demystifying the act of creativity. Like, mm-hmm. it doesn't require this magical spark. It just requires a little bit of thought and a little bit of work, and that can combine with a lot of other influences. But it's not this thing that is only given, at birth or through some kind of magical event to a certain small group of people. It's something everybody can do.
Sure.
So I think that's a cool thing to instill in a lot of musicians, not just composers, and really everybody, maybe even people that aren't going to be musicians.
Yeah.
Well,
we need to move. Go ahead.
I was going to put just one final point. I was going to talk about what we value in education, and not just music education. And that would be being able to create innovative thinkers, critical thinkers. And I would say that's one of the things in music, especially, we do work towards is, how do we create a basis of critical thinkers? And so much we find in schools today, it's about you kind of learn facts, you regurgitate facts. You learn how to think one way, but of course life doesn't work that way, and we have a constantly changing workforce, and what we value in this life constantly changes. And when I think about critical thinking, it's when you start to emphasize the process more than the result, that the process is what's important, and that you can find the same result but through many different approaches. And I would say that would be one of the arguments when we think about the need to have creative components and band in orchestras and choirs beyond just learning how to play an instrument well, which is important. But this is something that I think needs further consideration.
Absolutely.
Yep. So as Sam was saying, we should probably
need to move on. But Dave, we forgot to put it on the list. You should mention really quick the kerfuffle over the Ring. Production of the Ring.
Oh yeah,
I forgot to put it on the list. Sorry.
We were going to talk about Peter Gelb this week. Peter Gelb is the
general manager.
The title escaped me. Of the Metropolitan Opera, and he's responsible for a lot of cool projects, or a lot of recent projects. I guess I'll leave it at that. With the Metropolitan Opera, of all of the general managers of the Metropolitan Opera, he is one of them, and he's responsible. Is often given responsibility for the live in HD broadcasts, and also given the blame for the live in HD broadcasts, and he also gets a lot of credit and blame for Robert Lepage's recent Wagner Ring Cycle production,
which has had quite scathing reviews.
Mixed reviews. There are a couple of people who liked it. I didn't think it was as terrible as other people think it was, which is, I believe, as ringing an endorsement as I'm going to give today. But a lot of people have been taking him down recently, and some people that don't normally write extremely negative reviews. Alex Ross had a piece about his tenure in the New Yorker about a month ago that was about as negative as I've ever seen anything Ross has written. Yeah. In part, I think, because the New Yorker will just send him anywhere to see any awesome thing he wants to see, and so he doesn't have to put up with whatever crappy local performance that's going on.
Well, he wasn't entirely nice about the Philip Glass's new symphony as well.
Oh, that's true. But that was also terrible too. So anyway, what I was going to say is that
symphony. Sorry.
Anyway, there was a post on WQXR's opera blog, Operavore, by Olivia Giovetti, that kind of pulled together a bunch of negative reviews from a bunch of different places and synthesized them into her own thoughts on Peter Gelb's tenure. And Gelb got really mad and called up WQXR and had the piece taken down. So they retracted this negative piece about Peter Gelb's tenure. I'm sorry we didn't get a chance to talk about it, but it was a crazy thing that we didn't get to talk about Peter Gelb getting all upset with WQXR. It's a little fraught with journalistic integrity issues, because
it wasn't even that bad, though. I mean,
no,
it was
not. It was not. We'll link to a couple of a blog. Parterre Box has the original article, as well as some of the aftermath. But you're right, it wasn't that negative. No. It wasn't that pointed.
And then WQXR had said, like, this hadn't gone through the proper channels of editorial blah blah blah. And
it was total BS.
Yeah.
But I mean, I don't know.
It was total BS.
I think they should have kept it. There was no problem at all. But I mean, if Peter Gelb called up WQXR and said, "Hey, there's a problem too."
It's a huge editorial integrity issue.
I totally agree. Yeah, but the reason why this happened, though, was because WQXR does Met broadcasts.
Well, it's not just that they do Met broadcasts; it's that the Met underwrites WQXR. People like to talk about NPR not having ads. They absolutely have ads. They have advertisers. They just call them underwriters. And when WQXR gets a phone call from a big underwriter like the Metropolitan Opera, of course they're gonna listen. And it's spineless crap from WQXR. They need to put that article back and tell Peter Gelb to grow some thicker skin if he's gonna produce the largest budget operas in the biggest opera city in the world.
That's right. And to quote Roger Waters, they exchanged a walk-on part in the war for a lead role in a cage, baby.
Whatever you say.
That's right.
Is it pick of the week time now?
Pick of the week.
Sam is still not set up his cue.
No.
We'll get it next week. Our pick of the week this week is from our guests, the H2 Quartet. This is the piece we were talking about a little bit earlier. This is a transcription of Mark Mellett's string quartet. And I think Sam, when I was talking to Sam earlier today, before the show, he had not realized that it was originally composed for string quartet, and seemed surprised when I told him that it was originally a string piece. So we talked about it a little bit earlier.
Surprised. I was being ironic.
Okay.
Like it sounds like a string quartet. And then we had a conversation about how saxophones blend as well as string quartets, and they can make as many ancillary and interesting noises as string instruments can. I think more interesting noises than string instruments can.
Well, do you want to say anything else to set it up, Jonathan? You've already said quite a bit about this piece.
No, it's just something that we enjoy playing and audiences enjoy listening to, we think, at least.
We do.
But no, just thanks for playing it.
All right. So this is Movement 4 Groove Machine from Mark Mellett's Revolution, arranged for saxophone quartet by Jonathan Nickel, performed by the H2 Quartet. That was an excerpt again from Mark Mellett's Revolution, Movement 4 Groove Machine, arranged by Jonathan Nickel for saxophone quartet, performed by H2 Quartet. Thank you guys very much for sharing that with us.
Well, thank you. If I could plug that CD, it's recently released, and it's available through our website, and it really helps us when people buy it through the website. So if you're interested in getting it, check out the website.
All right, we'll have a link to that along with all the other things that we talked about today.
Thanks, Dave.
Have anything else you want to talk about on this piece? We kind of talked about it a lot earlier.
I just have one quick question. Did you find the transcription, like going from strings to saxophone? Was that were there any like specific instances you can think of where you didn't quite know how it was going to work out?
Yes, and there were a couple of spots where I had to accommodate range, especially for the baritone saxophone coming from a cello part, and in the lyrical movement, the slow movement of the quartet, there was a lot of double stops that were written with extended harmony. So I just had to make some decisions about what notes to keep and what notes not to keep. But as far as like the slap tongue works really well where there was like a aggressive pizzicato, and so it seems to translate really, really well. But he reorchestrates a lot of his music. He's got a group called the Mallets Consort, and they play Groove Machine as well. And that's like electric keyboard, electric guitar, cello, and percussion, I think.
And has he heard this?
Yeah, he likes it a lot.
Cool.
And we got a lot of positive feedback from Mark, and he was just really excited about the whole project.
Great, that's very exciting. Sam, were you going to say something?
I got a post show saxophone geek thing to talk to the Jeff and Jonathan about.
All right. Well, I think we should probably wrap it up then, and you can geek out after the show. That's going to do it for this week's SoundNotion. We record this show and stream it live every Sunday at 11 a.m. Eastern Time-ish. And so you can join us there, soundnotion.tv/live. You can join us in chat there. If you have any questions for our guests, you can feel free to drop them in there, and we'll pass them along. We'll have links to any of the stories that we talked about on our site as well. That's soundnotion.tv/SN. You can also contribute to the discussion there if you're listening or watching this after the fact, and leave a comment there. You can also connect with us on Facebook or Twitter. We're at SoundNotion on Twitter. This show and all our shows are available in the iTunes store, so be sure to subscribe there for free and catch every episode. SoundNotion's introduction includes music by Patrick Gulo and video by Tyler Lepp. Thanks again for watching. We'll see you next week.